Of the top stories this hour, but now let's bring you this one. Public service unions are threatening a full-blown strike if government does not meet their wage demands. Unions affiliated with SAFTU and SAFTU are demanding a 10% increase. Government has offered just 3%. Let's get more this and get some more understanding about what is really at issue with the General Secretary of Trade Union Federation, SAFTU, Mr. Zwelinzima Vavi. Good afternoon, Mr. Vavi. Thank you very much for joining us on today. I thought the whole issue of the salary increase has sort of been resolved because the 3% has already been given, but obviously this is still a very unresolved matter.
Absolutely, Dan, you are spot on. What government did are two things, in fact, three things now, if you look at the context of 3 years. In 2018, government simply refused to implement the last leg of an agreement that was signed, and that it will add another inflation-related increase, and in I think it was for 2020. From there on, in the last year, the government does second thing to undermine collective bargaining. It negotiates, there is a clear dispute, there is no agreement, and government moves unilaterally on its own to implement its 3% offer. And government then considers that to be closed. Yet another assault on collective bargaining. This year, knowing very well that the unions did not accept its 3% offer, government announces and invites unions to start another round of negotiations for 2023 and 2024. And basically saying that I'm going to do exactly the same thing. If you don't agree with one another, I'm going to unilaterally implement the wage offer, and I'm going to move on into the next year, which will be 2024, 2025. The unions in SAFTU, COSATU, and others are now saying, no, that's enough. We're going to be drawing a line on the sand. We're not going to allow government to undermine collective bargaining, because if they succeed in the public service, the employers in the private sector will think that that's the only way to manage labor relations in the economy as a whole. And they will use that precedence to do exactly the same everywhere else.
Yeah, now,
what is encouraging?
Yes.
What is encouraging is the levels of unity between COSATU, SAFTU, and others who are saying, no, that's enough, we can't go on like this.
Yeah, so the last 5 years have been fraught with the government not fulfilling its agreements and also not respecting, as you said, the bargaining council. And why would you think they would do that? Because I guess the last thing government would want is a full-blown public service strike.
Government is totally committed first to its neoliberal approaches to economic development. Government has adopted an austerity program from 2008 and 2009 in response to the world economic crisis. And therefore, government seeks to resolve the crisis of capitalism at the backs of the working people and working class in general. And government is, as part of that framework, determined to have a surplus in its budget in this financial year 2023 and 2024, irrespective of the fact that it has over 200,000 vacancies in the public service. That means that fewer workers in our hospitals, police stations, home affairs, correctional services centers everywhere are now burdened by massive numbers of vacancies. Secondly, government is not investing in the infrastructure in our schools. There's no laboratories, there's no libraries, there is no Wi-Fi, there is no security. In some cases, there's still even pit toilets. So government is making the working conditions of the public servants much more difficult than they will be. So that's the source of the tensions, basically, in the public service.
So how can these tensions how can these tensions be relieved? I mean, what's the way forward? Now we are hearing of a threat of a public sector union strike, and you say there is unity amongst yourselves as SAFTU, the likes of COSATU and others, to say, government, enough is enough. So what should we anticipate would happen next to try and resolve this?
It has to start with the budget that the government is presenting on the 22nd. We're calling, by the way, on our members in the Western Cape to flood the streets of Cape Town, demonstrate against austerity budget cuts, and to demand decent wages and inflation-related increases for all of the public sector workers, but also for the workers in the economy as a whole. Government has to abandon its anti-poor economic programs and embrace what we have always called a people's budget. A people's budget will include more expansionary fiscal and monetary policies, more fair distribution of the burden of taxes between the rich and the poor, and SAFTU have called for the introduction of the wealth and solidarity tax. But more importantly, will ensure that the growth is in this economy does not happen through redistributing wealth from the poor to the rich, but from the rich to the poor. So if government was to abandon its conservative approaches to development, there will be less tensions in its relationships with its employees represented by the unions. But of course, government is trying to take full advantage of disunity, fragmentization, many unions in the public sector, so that it can play the divide and rule strategy against the public sector workers. And it has succeeded in the past, and I'm afraid that even now, there's still some levels of disunity, despite unity between SAFTU and COSATU. FEDUSA unions are apparently no longer working with us towards a full-blown strike, and that's quite a devastating blow. SATU, the biggest concentration of workers in the public service, is apparently happy with these peanuts of 3%, and that's going to be undermining the unity of workers in the public sector. But even at this moment, in SAFTU, we're still making a call to FEDUSA, PSA in particular. We're still making a call to SATU to say, can you prioritize the interest of workers? Don't allow government to set precedences that are going to be bequeathed to the next generation to such a point that we will now be irrelevant as unions, because workers will see no value in joining unions that are unable to even secure inflation-related increases for their own members.
Mr. Zwelinzima Vavi, thank you very much for your time this afternoon on Today on eNCA. He's, of course, the General Secretary of Trade Union Federation, SAFTU.